On October 22nd, 1962, the tension between the Soviet Union and the United States reached an all-time high. In a live television address, American President John F. Kennedy confirmed that Russia had placed nuclear missiles in Cuba, within striking distance of most American cities.
From Russian ports for a long time now, military supplies have been sent to Cuba. Not only rockets, but bomb-carrying planes. And so close is Cuba to the States that the warning system would be useless.
Kennedy, in response, delivered a public threat.
It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
This was Kennedy's negotiation stance, one of defiance and inflexibility. He would not tolerate it, and he would not allow it. He ordered the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev to remove the missiles. He put a naval blockade in place to stop any more missiles from entering Cuba. Khrushchev said he'd ignore the blockade. Russian ships set course for Cuba, and the world seemed closer to nuclear war than at any point in history. But then, after a 13-day standoff, JFK's defiant bargaining style paid off. The Russians got cold feet, and they agreed to Kennedy's requests. Kennedy had saved the day, not by compromising, but by demanding. At least, that's the story that was told in the press.
The Russian leader played up as only he can. But as we go to press, it is announced that he will suspend shipments of arms to Cuba. Kennedy has spoken and acted in the way the Soviet understands.
However, recent declassified files tell a very different story. Robert Cialdini, in his new and expanded edition of Influence, shares that Kennedy's win was not due to his inflexible negotiation style, but rather due to his willingness to compromise, to remove US Jupiter missiles from Turkey and Italy in return for Khrushchev's removal of missiles from Cuba. The Americans made a private trade-off, and that's what changed the Russians' minds. To maintain his political popularity, Kennedy made the compromise secret. He made that secret a condition of the agreement. He didn't want to be seen as conceding anything to the Soviets. But that's a shame, because the world learnt the wrong lesson. The world learnt that inflexibility, aggression, and a principled stance are what's needed to win. Yet the reality is different. Succeeding involved compromise and reciprocity, giving and taking. This age-old principle of reciprocity is actually what saved the day. And this principle isn't just important for leaders looking to deter a nuclear war, it is useful for everyone, whether we're running a team, growing a charity, selling cheese, or promoting a podcast. Today, I share how I used Kennedy's hidden tactic to persuade 8 influencers to promote nudge. The mechanism behind reciprocity is childlike in its simplicity. If you help someone, they'll feel indebted to help you in return. Humans are taught this principle in schools, churches, and offices around the world. It is one of the first lessons a parent teaches their child. Reciprocity is such a deep part of our human identity that it's visible in our language. The Magna Carta of 1215, one of the most important legal documents in the history of democracy, is based on reciprocity. It states that men are obligated to repay favours, gifts, invitation, and friendly actions in the future. This obligation became part of our language. The phrase much obliged is used to thank someone. The Portuguese thank one another by using a similar word, saying obrigado, and the Japanese say sumimasen, which literally means this will not end. In other words, I will repay you. Now, some of you listening might think this is all a bit high level, so let's examine some recent studies on reciprocity to better understand its importance and power, starting with one of my favourites. Imagine trying to convince a group of high-flying London bankers to donate a full day's salary to charity. That doesn't seem very easy, does it? Bankers are deeply motivated by cash. But researchers at the UK's Behavioural Insights team found a hilariously simple way to persuade them. Incredibly, if the bankers were given a small 50p packet of sweets, they were twice as likely to donate a day's salary, often amounting to thousands of pounds. A small 50p act of generosity led to an asymmetric reciprocity of thousands of pounds. James and Bolstein, in their 1992 study, found similar asymmetric benefits from tiny gifts. The two behavioural scientists found that sending a small $5 gift along with an insurance survey was twice as effective as offering a $50 payment for sending back a completed survey. Sending a small gift with the survey delivered a 2x return on investment compared to simply paying the individual to complete the survey. But the benefits of reciprocity aren't just limited to charitable donations and surveys. They can be a surefire way to increase business profits. Vance Packard, the author of the incredible popular 1957 book Hidden Persuaders, shared a remarkable story of an Indiana supermarket selling £1,000 of cheese in 3 hours. £1,000 of cheese is around 7 times my weight. How did they cash in on all this cheddar? Well, the Indiana supermarket did something that was novel at the time, but commonplace now. They offered free samples of cheese to punters who entered the store. Free samples are commonplace today, but they are still incredibly effective. The scientist Lammers proved this in an experiment at a California candy store. The experiment was simple. On one day, the researchers would give customers a free piece of candy as they entered the store. On other days, there would be no free candy. So, did the free sweet change behaviour? Yes, dramatically. Receiving the gift made recipients 42% more likely to buy more of that candy. Reciprocity boosts revenue. But you might question these examples. Is reciprocity really fueling these fromage sales, or is it simply a chance to taste the cheese that makes people buy? Critics will state that the free sample increases sales not due to reciprocity, but because we're always more likely to buy something if we've had the chance to taste it first. However, there is evidence to suggest that it is the reciprocity on its own that is causing this increase in sales. Steve Martin, an earlier guest on Nudge, and his colleague Helen Mackin conducted a small study showing the impact of reciprocity on food sales. At a number of McDonald's restaurants in Colombia and Brazil, staff handed balloons to children. Half of the children were handed the balloons after they left the store, and the other half were handed the balloons before they entered the store. So, does this free balloon trigger reciprocity and boost sales? Yes, it does. According to Steve's boss, Robert Cialdini, the total family bill rose by 25% when the balloons were given first. Tellingly, this included a 20% increase in the purchase of coffee, an item that the children are unlikely to order. Cialdini writes that, in general, business operators have found that after accepting a gift, customers are willing to purchase products and agree to requests that they would have otherwise declined. It's reciprocity, not the chance to try before buying, that fuels these additional sales of coffee, cheese, and candy. After researching the wealth of evidence on this principle, I became utterly convinced. I'm certain that reciprocity is one of the most powerful ways to shift behaviour. It's an innate principle that seems to govern all of us, altering our language, behaviour, and even the outcome of nuclear missile negotiations. So, I wanted to test it. I wanted to see if I could use the principle to persuade others to support me. Could I use the principle of reciprocity to convince 8 influencers to promote this podcast? It is time to test the reciprocity bias. My plan is simple. Convince 8 influencers to promote an episode of Nudge using just reciprocity. I offered a favour to 10 influencers and then asked them to return the favour. Now, I wanted to do this ethically, so I had a few rules. I wouldn't lie. All the praise I would give to others would be entirely genuine. All the favours I offered were typical favours that I'd usually give to people I liked, and I wouldn't push my luck. If someone ignored me or didn't seem interested, then I'd let it be. With those rules in place, I created a list of 10 influencers I liked and respected. This list included best-selling authors like Rory Sutherland and popular podcast hosts like Louis Grenier. To test myself, I'd also tried a principle on people who I had no prior relationship with, like Habits Weekly founder Samuel Saltzer and How to Hack the Brain podcast hosts Zeba Goddard and Rafi Marj. My approach had 3 parts. Firstly, I'd message these people telling them, truthfully, how much I liked their work. I told the product marketing influencer Tamara how I read her newsletter on product marketing every week. I told Rory Sutherland how his appearance on Nudge was a chart topper. I also messaged John Evans, the host of Uncensored CMO, to praise his episode with Scott Galloway. Once I'd praised them, I offered to do them a favour. Often this would simply be an offer to promote their work. For example, I could share a link to Jay Klaus's new product in my emails or promote John's podcast on LinkedIn. But I did try to vary my support. For example, with Louis Grenier, I offered to proofread his upcoming book. Now, these are things I would typically do. I like helping out these people, and I definitely wanted to proofread Louis's book. But I also wanted to see if these small acts of kindness could eventually trigger the reciprocity bias. To run the test, I needed to do this favour before asking for my own favour. For reciprocity to work, you have to give first. One study on Dutch residents found that they were much more likely to agree to participate in a month-long survey if the proposed payment was sent to them before they agreed. Sending the money and the invitation made them more likely to sign up. Sending the money after the survey was completed wasn't anywhere near as effective. Cialdini found something similar with hotel guests in the States. In his tests, he left cards in the hotel rooms encouraging guests to reuse the hotel towels. In addition, the guests read that the hotel had already made a financial contribution to an environmental charity in the guest's name. Offering this favour before action was just much more effective. 75% of the guests who read this card reused their towels. That was far more than the 47% who reused their towels in the control condition. So, I needed to ask these influencers for a favour only after I'd given them a favour first. There was another technique I was keen to try as well. See, in one study by the researcher Martin, students were exposed to arguments for and against voluntary euthanasia. Martin found that both arguments became significantly more persuasive if the students had been gifted a caffeinated drink. With that in mind, I tried to ask one influencer out for coffee, but he declined, so I'll have to test that nudge out next time. In total, I praised and offered to promote 10 different influencers. A few weeks later, I got back in touch and asked for my own favour. I'd spent a lot of time working on a new episode of Nudge. For the episode, I'd sunk weeks into researching political speeches. The episode, titled How to Give an Election-Winning Speech, was, I thought, one of my best, and I wanted as many people as possible to hear it. So I contacted all 10 influencers and sent them this message. Hi. Hope all is good. Just so you know, I published that LinkedIn post promoting your show or added a promotion to your work in my newsletter. I then attached a screenshot of that promotion. The message continues by saying, hopefully it drove more awareness for your fantastic work. Now, I've spent the past few weeks working on a new episode of Nudge titled How to Give an Election-Winning Speech. I've honestly never sunk more time into an episode, and I think it's one of my best yet. I'd love for as many people as possible to hear it, so I thought I'd ask for my own favour. Would you mind promoting the show? Cheers, Phil. P.S. You're 100% free to refuse. I don't usually do this, but I wanted to make a special push for this show. That's the message. Of the 10 influencers I reached out to, 8 agreed to promote the podcast. Many of them shared the podcast on LinkedIn, some dropped the link in their newsletter, and one wrote an entire email promoting my episode. I'd read about the power of the bias, but I was still very surprised. 80% of these influencers agreed to promote my work after one show of reciprocity. These influencers usually charge very high sums for this type of promotion. A LinkedIn post would cost 3 figures, and a newsletter promotion could set you back thousands. If I'd paid these influencers for the same exposure, it might have cost me close to $3,000, and yet they gave away all this exposure for free. Their promotion worked as well. The election-winning speech podcast stayed at the top of the marketing charts for almost 2 weeks after the experiment. However, some of you listening may be wondering if you can replicate this. After all, many of the influencers I asked, they already knew me. They knew my work. Many of them I had a relationship with, and many might have promoted my show regardless. Now, I'd argue that that's unlikely. Most of these influencers have never promoted my work before. It's unlikely that this promotion would have happened organically, but the question still lingered in my head. Could I use this reciprocity nudge on a much larger group of people with whom I don't have personal relationships? Well, I thought I'd give it a try on you. If you've been a loyal listener of Nudge, you may have heard about my Science of Persuasion course. In that 3-part video course, I taught everything I knew on persuasion. The course was, and still is, completely free. My newsletter subscribers got it at absolutely no cost. In essence, I'd given out my free cheese samples, but I hadn't tried to sell any cheese. So I emailed the 1,039 lovely people who took my course and asked them for a much bigger favour. I asked them to buy my other course, my Science of Marketing course. That costs £200. To sweeten the deal, I included a 20% discount and, of course, I reminded them of the favour I'd given them. Here's what I wrote in that email. As you can imagine, creating this course took a fair chunk of time. These are back-of-the-napkin calculations, but researching took me 50 hours, writing the script and presentation took 10 hours, recording and editing took 5 hours, and promoting took 3 hours. That's 68 hours of work given to you for free. So I thought I'd ask if you'd be willing to return the favour. If you liked my free course, I think you'll love my Science of Marketing course. The course is a natural next step for you, revealing the science behind the marketing that works. With 4 modules, 14 chapters and 53 bite-sized lessons, the Science of Marketing course contains everything you need to level up your marketing. Plus, as an extra thank you, I'm giving you a 20% discount code. Just type the word reciprocity at checkout to unlock the discount. Thanks again, folks. If you support my work, I'll be eternally grateful. But of course, please feel free to refuse. I know it's not for everyone. Cheers, Phil. Following that email, 6 subscribers paid for the course. 6 sales from an email like that is pretty low. I expected many more. Now, many of these people might have already taken the course. Many might not want it. It's quite a few years old by now. But I think it did teach me something about reciprocity. It made me realise that reciprocity is much, much more powerful when used on a one-to-one level. A personal one-to-one gesture of reciprocity is far more salient. Yet, you know each other by name. You're friendly. You feel the urge to return the favour. Thousands of my subscribers receiving a faceless email from me was different. The recipients didn't feel the same desire to return the favour. They probably didn't feel that my free course was much of a favour in the first place. Reciprocity is powerful, but it's less effective at scale. It's better to use one-on-one. Despite all this, my overall takeaway from today is that reciprocity can be incredibly powerful. It can be a surefire way to persuade someone if used correctly. It works for people of all ages, from kids at McDonald's to Soviet leaders. In his book, Will Storr shares that researchers have found that the same reciprocity rules apply to 60 major ethnic groups worldwide. But I wanted to end with some advice. Don't be nice to folks just for your own gain. Don't only offer favours because you want something in return. No, just do it for the sake of it. Offering favours and being kind isn't simply a means to reach a reciprocity goal. No, it's a worthwhile and fulfilling activity in itself. In their book, Look Again, Tally Sherritt and Cass Sunstein share that giving $5 to a friend provides more joy and happiness for far longer than being gifted $5 would ever provide. Giving makes us feel good, so give as much as you can. It helped me create a chart-topping podcast episode, it turned greedy bankers into top donors, and perhaps saved us from nuclear war.